Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Golf and Politics, where tonight we are going to dive into the 2025 elections. There were statewide elections in Virginia, in New Jersey. There was a mayor's race in New York City. There were races around the country that not as big of a night for elections as the midterm elections will be next November, but still a very important night. So, Rob, we have some great guests tonight that we're going to get to. But before we have our experts come on and talk about last night, why don't we each give 90 seconds review of what we thought happened last night? We'll give the listeners our analysis before we introduce our guest and hear theirs and dive into a bunch of questions with them. So if you want to kick it off, the Democrats had a good night, so I'll let you kick it off. Give us 90 seconds of your analysis from last night.
Well, I think it was a good night for Democrats. Obviously, not just in Virginia, California, New York, and New Jersey, but in most contested races across the country, independent voters moved away from the president in just 10 or 11 months. Look, this isn't unusual. Typically, the sitting president struggles in off-year elections. There's always going to be some buyer's remorse. I think other than 1998 and 2002, where George W. Bush picked up seats in a midterm election. Obviously, we're not at the midterms yet, but he picked up seats in 2002, riding a popularity high post 9/11, and Bill Clinton picked up seats in off-year election in 98 as sort of a response to Newt Gingrich and the impeachment over the Monica Lewinsky saga. So this wasn't unusual, but what is interesting, and I think would be discouraging for Democrats, is that even if you just look at New Jersey, for example, in 2021, Joe Biden took 48% of the Latino and Hispanic vote. That dropped to 20% for Kamala Harris in 2024. Last night, Mikey Sherrill took 49%. That happened in several races in Texas. It also happened in Virginia, in districts where all of the losses that Kamala Harris took in 2024 from Biden numbers came right back to the Democrats. So I think that was an encouraging thing for Democrats going into the midterms, to see the trend line of younger minority voters, particularly Black and Hispanic men that were breaking toward President Trump in 2024, now look to be coming home back to the Democratic Party. Overall, I think that this is sort of a reflection on, look, we still have higher prices, we still have inflation. People are uncertain about the economy. 8 out of 10 people in the exit polls, and I know everybody on here doesn't always rely on exit polling, said that the biggest issues they voted on were the economy, meaning inflation, I would say likely uneasiness about that. 2 was healthcare costs, and 3 was education. Down the list were immigration and crime, which have been the large public focus of this administration. And I think there's already some Trump fatigue. He's in the news every single minute of every day. I can't even turn on my phone without getting some kind of Trump update. And so for the party of limited government, this guy is just all up in my business every single day. So I think that there's some fatigue, regardless of who the president is or what party's in power. We have a tendency in this country of wanting change and then immediately wanting change again. And so I'll reflect back to my time as a Republican when I worked for Bush Cheney 04 under Karl Rove. And after that big victory, I can remember Karl Rove predicting a permanent conservative majority. And just a year and a half later, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. 2 years after that, Barack Obama's president. And then Democrats had 60 seats in the Senate, 250 or 60 seats in the House. And we thought, Democrats have a permanent majority. It's the nature of politics. Shit changes, and shit changes fast.
Well, great analysis there. There's a lot that I agree with. I would like to just say, I think it's, last night, I don't want to look too far into the midterms and predict what's going to happen there based on a snapshot in time. Now, the snapshot in time had real consequences, especially for people who live in New York City and other places. But look, on this very podcast 1 year ago, we had Brad on. Who's going to be on tonight, and we talked about the election. And I said this. I said that this was not a mandate to, in order for this to really be a mandate, we had to have a governing majority and get things done and deliver on the promises that we made to the American people. And, while I think there's been some real progress made on things like energy prices and gasoline, I believe inflation is still hanging around and affordability was clearly on the minds of the voters, and it hurt Republican candidates up and down the states that had elections last night. Now, most of the work that I do is on Republican primaries. And so I see that up close and personal every single day. And it's hard for a lot of candidates, I think, to shift out of that mode, because I think we'll hear tonight maybe that there's a huge difference in what the messaging needs to be to win a partisan primary versus winning a general election. And I think Republicans have stayed in primary mode a lot of times, because think about it, so many members of Congress and political figures, 90% of the races in this country are decided by primaries. And so we were clearly not shifting our messaging to reach the middle in any way. And I also say this, look, after 2024, Rob, you made it very clear that the country was still very divided. And you weren't wrong to say that. And even after last night and the big victories for Democrats, I will still say the country's still very divided. We don't have a governing majority. The government is still shut down. There's really not an end in sight and a clear path to any kind of sanity when it comes to a budget or anything like that. So I think that we're kind of still in the same boat. It's just things have shifted. It could be a bounce back against Trump. It also could be that we just had really bad candidates up and down the ticket in some of these places, especially in Virginia. Like, just as Kamala Harris was not a good candidate for the Democrats, I don't believe that Winsome Sears was a good candidate for Republicans. So we'll see as we move forward if we're going to have better candidates or
I just
not.
have one more quick point before we
Mhm.
get to our guests. The last several presidents we've had get the advice when they take office to govern as if they have a mandate. And that's probably smart. You've got to get your stuff done fast before the country sours on you, inevitably. But whether it was Barack Obama or Joe Biden or now Donald Trump, when you govern like you've won 70% of the popular vote and you took 49.5, even if you cleared 300 in the electoral college, when you win with a plurality and govern like you're at 70%, you're gonna run into this kind of trouble that all modern presidents run into. On the Democratic side, the one thing that sort of confirmed, um, my there's been a lot of fear about, the Democrats' numbers are in the tank too. I mean, if the president's in the high 30s or low 40s, depending upon which poll you look at, the Democratic numbers are even lower. But I wasn't super worried about that because a lot of those people are people like me who are never going to vote for Donald Trump or a lot of these MAGA guys, but we're pissed at Democrats too. But they still showed up and voted. And they came out and they supported the Democratic cause. That doesn't mean that that's going to continue. Democrats have to give Democratic voters a reason to vote for them proactively. We'll get away with it in the midterms, but we have to decide what our path is on a nominee going forward. I mean, the good news last night for Democrats is that, look, we had a conservative Democrat win in Virginia. We had a liberal Democrat pass a big initiative in California. And then we had a far left Democratic Socialist win the mayoral race. The mayoral race to me doesn't say much because, look, he was running against a very flawed former governor who was a Democrat and a really weird kind of third party Republican kind of guy. So I don't read too much into the Mondani race, but Abigail Spanberger winning by 15 points is
Huge.
big.
Yeah, big.
That's a big deal.
Well, let's get into it. We have great guests tonight that we're going to ask them a lot of questions. I'll introduce the Republican and bring on the show. Great friend of mine, John Rogers. He's a partner and a pollster at Signal. Trusted partners of mine, do a lot of races, been in a lot of foxholes with John Rogers. we're in the middle of a foxhole right now in a governor's race here in Oklahoma. John, welcome to the program.
Matt, great to be with you and Rob and also with Brad.
Yeah. So welcome back to the show, Brad Cheney. Brad is a great personal friend and business partner at the Majority Group. Brad had a distinguished career on Capitol Hill, worked for Senator Clinton, was the chief of staff to a California Democrat from Los Angeles, whose name, Brad Sherman. Brad Sherman. I had a senior moment there. And we first met during the financial crisis. Brad was a lobbyist for the Mortgage Bankers Association, and I was working for a member in the Financial Services Committee, dealing with TARP and Dodd-Frank and all of that stuff. And really built a relationship out, frankly, through golf. And played a lot of golf together. And then I believe in 2018 or 2019,
19.
we had a meeting and decided we would try to partner together in a lobbying firm, and here we are, still here. So welcome back, Brad. And Brad's unique insight here is Brad and his wife Rebecca are very close personal friends with the Spanbergers, with Abigail and her husband, and we're actively involved in the campaign, and we're there to celebrate the victory last night. And he knows as much about Virginia politics as anybody, so I'll take his word over mine on analyzing Virginia.
Great to be back with the program. So
I'm glad you're here, Brad. One of my favorite people, even though I disagree with you on politics most of the time. So let's get into the questions.
We agree more than you like to.
Yeah, we do. We definitely get along on a lot of things. All right, first question. Did Abigail Spanberger's decisive win suggest that Democrats perform better when they nominate pragmatic center-left candidates rather than progressives? And will the party take any lessons from this seriously going into the midterms and even further going into 2028?
So, great question. I think that the lesson to be learned both from Abigail's win last night, but also the Cheryl win in New Jersey, and even really the Mandami win in New York, is Democrats do best when they pick candidates who focus on issues that voters care about. And all three of those candidates really focused a lot on affordability and cost of living issues. They did it different ways. It came to different solutions, but that there was a unique theme that I think ran through all three of those races, that they really hammered home that things are more expensive and voters were unhappy with it. And they focused on issues that voters cared about, as opposed to, especially in Virginia, issues that voters didn't care about. And I think the exit polling kind of proved that. When you look in Virginia at the exit polls, the top three issues that voters cared about were the economy, healthcare, and education. The bottom two were immigration and crime. And Winsome Sears focused most of her time on, well, immigration, crime, and bathrooms. And voters didn't care about that, and they voted that way. So I think that that's really the lesson for Democrats to take out of this, is to find candidates, whether they are centrist or progressives, who will focus on really those household economic issues that voters care about.
And Brad, do you when there's a big debate within the Democratic Party right now on, I would say a large portion of our party wants to do what Republicans did and take a more populist, tear it all down, outsider approach, the Mamdani approach. And there's a lot of money and energy behind that. My instinct would be more of the Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanberger approach, more of a triangulation, moderate. Let's go try to gobble up the center that feel left out by the far right and far left. Where do you fall on that as far as, looking into the future of what the Democratic Party should be doing?
I mean, listen, if the entire country looked like New York City or Vermont, then I'd go with Mamdani or Bernie Sanders' approach to things. But there's a lot of places in between that don't look like that. And so I think you got to figure out a way to meet voters where they are and to get 50% of the vote plus one to win. And that's what I think the candidates should do. I think blowing it up is not really a solution. And I understand that may play well in Brooklyn, but it doesn't play well in Bedford, Virginia. So,
well, let me take it over to John with the same question. But John, let me add a little caveat to that. Something Brad said uh, that you've told me as a pollster working on campaigns with me is that we need to focus on issues that voters care about. And you even pointed out recently when we were looking at a survey, I wanted to go in one direction messaging, and you said, hey, Kamala Harris actually won a majority of voters of the issues that she was talking about, but she wasn't talking about the right issues that the voters in the battleground states cared about. So how much truth do you believe in what Brad said there? And then also, how do you feel the Democrats as nationally need to embrace, what kind of candidates they need to be embracing to win?
Yeah, if the median Democratic candidate for Congress were campaigning like Abigail Spanberger, I'd be much more worried than I am about the midterms. And so I think Brad is right that the Spanberger campaign, I think, was very disciplined in what they talked about. And she is kind of a more moderate figure in the party. I think it was in 2022, something like that. At some point during Biden's presidency, she made the comment that, she was like, Biden was not elected to be FDR.
No one
And
elected him to be FDR.
right, nobody elected him to be FDR. And I'm sure she caught a lot of flack from a lot of the leftist groups, but that's kind of her personality, and I think she was channeling that in some of the issues that she spoke to. And the candidate quality matters a lot, and I think that the Republican nominee here in Virginia, I think she was almost speaking to like a presidential year electorate, right? I mean, two very different electorates from presidential year to an off-year governor's election. So, it'll be interesting to see if Democrats take what I would say would be the right lesson from these elections.
Do you think that there's a danger of candidates right now sort of being stuck in a silo? I know there are voters that are stuck in media silos, whether it's their social media algorithm or something else. But if a Democratic candidate is only watching MSNBC all day and listening to Pod Save America, and a Republican candidate is only watching Fox News all day and listening to, I don't know who the conservative equivalent, Joe Rogan or whoever, that they kind of lose touch with the voter.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for candidates, but I also think it's a challenge for campaign staff. And like increasingly, sometimes you'll talk to campaign staffers in their 20s or 30s, and it's like they're terminally online, and it's like you need to think about the median 60-year-old voter in your district and what do they care about, and do they even know the different podcasts or the different very in the weeds debates that are happening online. So yeah, I think that's a challenge both for candidates, but then also for campaigns.
Well, shifting gears here, there was a major election in California. The Republicans gave up. Ultimately, I believe the Democrats spent $98 million in California. The Republicans spent $36 million. The question, and I'll start off with you, John. Did President Trump miscalculate his redistricting fight, particularly given how big the vote was in California? And so while he might have got a victory in the legislature in Texas, it's going to get off. Is it going to just get offset by what happened in California? Has this set off a chain of events that ultimately won't be good for the president and for Republicans in the midterms?
Yeah, I don't. So we've done some polling on this, and we find that like it just is not a top 3 or even top 5 issue for most voters, even if they agree or disagree with what Governor Abbott did in Texas or what Governor Newsom has done in California. And I think too, the saliency of it has become more muted as the months have gone along, and different states are responding to each other, right? And so I think by the time that we get to, let's say, April or May of next year, I think in most states, I think in most congressional districts, you think about the congressional district that just came open today up in Maine. Like, I don't, it's hard to believe that that will become like a central issue in that election in like August and September and October of next year.
Yeah, I also think that the part of the miscalculation here on the president's part is the assumption that the shifts in the electorate that Rob referenced last year were permanent. And I think what we saw last night, especially with, kind of critical demographic groups, was that they returned sort of back to their historical mean of their performance. You looked at, in Virginia, Abigail got 93% of the African American vote. She got, I'm just trying to pull up the numbers. I think it was like 80%, 70% of the Hispanic vote, 80% of the Asian vote. That was a
That's a
huge increase in performance over Trump from a year before. One of the things that I think, people have talked about that could potentially happen, especially with the Hispanic vote in Texas, is to get the number of seats that they're targeting, they had to dilute a bunch of the districts and make them, potentially more competitive. If they don't get the same Hispanic performance with Republican candidates in those districts, there's a chance they actually could lose those seats. So it will be interesting to see how that all plays out. And I think at the end of the day, the redistricting across the country is going to sort of net out to be about equal. There may be a 1 or 2 vote, district change for Democrats or Republicans across the country, but it's not going to be, Republicans aren't going to be picking up 10 or 20 seats enough to save the majority.
I do think I do think on that there is a difference between, if you have Hispanics in Texas and the Rio Grande Valley that who often refer to themselves as Tejanos, like in Starr County and places like that where they shifted in some cases like 60 points from 2016 to 2024. Those communities tend to be very different from like the suburban Latinos in Northern Virginia or even in
Yep.
New Jersey. And so I do think I'm not saying that what you were referencing, Brad, is this, but I do think sometimes online on Twitter in the last 24 hours, I've seen a lot of like equivalency drawn between suburban Latino districts or communities in New Jersey and with those in South Texas. But your point is right that a lot of those districts, they're now at like R+10, right? And certainly if you're looking at a presidential year to a midterm, that could be enough that they could be very competitive in a year that is, more of a blue wave.
I was chief of staff to a conservative Democrat in Idaho, and we had an R+19 district. It was more conservative than Eric Cantor's or John Boehner's at the time. And one of the things that I do that impresses me about Donald Trump is that his endorsement in a Republican primary means everything. Like, you have to have that endorsement or you're screwed. We've never had that in the Democratic side. Like, in 2010, had Barack Obama endorsed our Democratic opponent in the primary, it would have been the greatest thing on earth for us. Like, had he endorsed our opponent. Um, we're not familiar with that kind of loyalty in the Democratic side. My question for Brad, for both of you, is, are you at all concerned that with the redistricting on both sides, that we're just going to make fewer competitive races, which is less business for you guys on your side? And well, you still have the primary business, which I guess is the bulk. Right. So this is good for you. But for Brad and I, we have to deal with the people you send here in real terms when they're trying to do stuff. And I can tell you, my concern is that these folks don't care about, they have no incentive to compromise because their only fear of losing is in a primary. I mean, they could literally screw a dog, post the video on YouTube and win their general election against the Democrat or against the Republican. So are you worried that all of this gerrymandering is just going to make the gridlock that much worse, even if it feels good today? Oh, Brad, you start. You start.
Listen, 100% agree. I don't think that gerrymandering is good for the long-term health of our democracy. And I have talked with Matt about this, at MG Cup a couple weeks ago, that I made that point. And, the thing that happened in Virginia last night is the Democrats picked up 13 or 14 seats in the House of Delegates, 100-seat House of Delegates. Those districts were drawn by an independent, nonpartisan commission. And that just shows you sort of like when you have a really a wave election, how much the votes can swing. The Democrats are now going to have 65 seats in the House of Delegates. But the interesting thing, and the thing that if I was a Republican, I would feel good about, is the district that Democrats picked up that had the highest Trump performance rate last year was 2.9%. They didn't lose a district less than that. So, it's really was a very kind of narrow margin. Democrats picked up a lot of Democrat seats that Harris won, and then they picked up a few seats that Trump won. And so that would make me feel better as a Republican this morning. But I don't think the long-term health for our democracy is good to be gerrymandering these districts up so much.
Yeah, I think we'll probably in the near term have fewer probably the percentage of competitive general election districts will go down by like 10, percentage points or something like that, 10 or 20 percentage points. But I mean, I think that things will also, potentially shift on the primary side too, right? Because like if all of a sudden like you have districts because you gerrymandered a state and you try to get as many seats as possible, and then you bring the margin down across the board from maybe in a Democratic state where the average margin was D plus 20 now to D plus 10, or the same on the Republican side, that does mean that at some point, if you nominate somebody that is really too far to the left or too far to the right that gets through your primary, they may lose a general election in a wave election. And then it could be kind of a backlash or kind of a reconsideration of like, maybe we need to kind of police the primaries a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, just looking at the Virginia results, and I haven't actually seen it broken down by congressional district, but right now, there's 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans in Virginia, in Congress. Um, I think that when it's all said and done, Abigail Spanberger likely will win 8 of the congressional districts in Virginia, maybe 9. It sort of depends on what happens on with the McGuire seat, which is an R+6 district. Um, and right now we're in the process of potentially doing redistricting in Virginia to pick up really what would amount to 1 more seat, right? We might get it to 10-1. So it's not even like that much compared to districts that are drawn to be competitive, which I think is an interesting point of everything that we're going to go through in Virginia potentially to do redistricting for next year.
Let's go ahead and I want to get another question. And John, I want you to start it off here. You do lots of polling, right? And national issues matter, and the mood of the electorate matters. But how much does candidate quality really matter? How much do voters pay attention to likability and personality when deciding who to vote for? And how much do you believe is based on just the national mood or the local mood on a big issue set?
Yeah, I think Virginia is a good way to think about this. I mean, if you look back at 2021, I mean, Glenn Youngkin is almost a Hall of Fame political talent. Like, I mean, he's an incredible political talent, but he also met a moment politically in 2021 that was really right for a Republican, right? And I think a lesser talent than Youngkin probably couldn't have won in 2021, but I don't know that Youngkin could have won in an electorate or an environment that was as conducive as it was in 2021, right? And again, I think also people are sort of maybe reading a little. I mean, these were 2 blue states, right, that held elections yesterday. And Biden won Virginia by 10 points in 2020. Harris won Virginia by 6 points in 2024. So as much as it pains me to say as a resident of the Commonwealth, but Virginia is not a swing state, right? So the fact that Youngkin was able to win in 2021 was pretty incredible. And then you have, I think it's very fair to say, a lesser political talent as the Republican nominee this time around. And Spanberger winds up winning by 14 points. So candidate quality certainly mattered in the Virginia gubernatorial election. But it also, it also down ballot. It's interesting that, I mean, Jay Jones, right? He who of the sent some pretty infamous text at this point, but ran 8 points behind the top of the ticket, right? And that's because you had a lot of people that were like, I don't really know that I want to put somebody who wrote those things in charge of law enforcement in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that at the end of the day, candidates and campaigns really matter. And I think that Winsome Sears was not a good candidate. And I think she also ran a particularly poor campaign. When your campaign theme is let's keep a good thing going, and 2/3 of the electorate are dissatisfied or angry with the direction the country's going in, that's probably not really going to be the best campaign message. Her campaign also they just did stupid things in my mind. There was one debate that was in the gubernatorial election. There was one commercial break during the debate, in the middle of the debate. Abigail's campaign bought a 30-second ad in the debate. Winsome's campaign bought a 30-second ad in the commercial break after the debate ended, whenever everybody turned it off. Her closing message that she had on broadcast TV, and I'm sure you saw it, John, was her running clips of the Spanberger campaign's negative campaign commercials against her. And basically what she said was, I'm not as crazy as they make me sound like. That's not really going to win you an election. and she lost. And it was, but I also think you have to give credit. I'm not just saying this because she's a friend, to the Spamberger, both as a candidate and as a campaign. She really believed, and part of it was because she was elected in a Republican-held district, for 2 terms before it was redistricted. She believed in the importance of showing up in rural parts of the state, even though that she knew she wouldn't win. The last week of the campaign, she did a bus tour, and she went to Lee County, Virginia, which is the furthest county west in the state of Virginia. It's further west than Detroit. But I think what you saw on election day, and if you start looking at the going county by county, she narrowed the margins in those counties. She might have lost by 15 points, but she didn't lose by 30 points. And a lot of those times, even when she lost, she got more votes than McAuliffe got, and Sears got less votes than Youngkin got.
Brad, that's
And
that's a great point. With it, we brought this up when we were riding down in the car together in Austin.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think Rob made the point. He's like, look, Democrats can win nationally, still losing all the rural areas. We just can't be getting beat 80-20 in these counties. I mean, we have to find a way to show up. I think the same thing's true for Republicans. Like, we're going to have to find ways to win in urban and suburban precincts, or at least cut the losses to a minimum. A lot of times we're just not showing up, and I think that's a really good point that you make there, Brad.
Yeah, and Abigail flipped 10 counties in Virginia last night from 2021 for Youngkin. And, some of them were, Stafford County, which is the exurbs of Virginia, Chesterfield County outside of Richmond. But she flipped Montgomery County, which is southwest of Roanoke, where Virginia Tech is. That's a county that Youngkin won by 10 points. She won it last night by 13.
That's
in part
incredible.
because
23 points.
Yeah.
Well,
she
and
won.
Brad, there are also other things to look at. I mean, I know John and Matt have pointed out, well, these are blue states. Well, first of all, there were elections all across the country, and we saw similar trend lines. And there's a lot to read in the tea leaves. So you want to look at in Virginia, yes, Northern Virginia is very blue, but Southern Virginia is very red. And every single county in the Commonwealth went more left of center last night than last year and 4 years ago. And the same is true. You can look at county by county in New Jersey. You can look in Minnesota. You can look in Ohio, Texas, Florida, everywhere that had an election last night, there was a shift. And it comes back to a simple fact: when the president is not on the ballot, that the president's approval rating in off-year elections matters a great deal more than just about anything else. And the only reason Joe Biden didn't have a terrible midterms in 2022 is because of the Roe v. Wade Dobbs decision gave, some wind behind the sails of Democrats. Otherwise, there would have been a red wave in 2022. And so I guess my question for John would be, do you think it's possible for the president to recover his approval rating, even in the neighborhood of, let's say 46% would be the new 50? Is he going to be able to do that before the midterms? And if not, is there really a chance for the Republicans to hang on to the House?
Yeah, well, just going back to another off-year election, just to kind of remind everybody, I remember there were a lot of people on the left of center who looked at Andy Bashir's reelection in Kentucky in 2023 and said that that pretended, some really positive tea leaves for the Democratic Party, and obviously it didn't really come to fruition. So I do think, in a way, they're almost like separate games that you have to look at, and there's some overlap, but there's also a lot of things that are very different when you're looking at off-year electorate versus a midterm elected versus a presidential electorate. But I do think one thing, Rob, that kind of gets your question a little bit, is that I do think will be different this time around than especially Trump's first term, is Trump's political operation is much sharper. They're much more professional. They're much more organized this time around than they were in 2017 and 2018. And so even though Trump himself is not on the ballot, his team is fully committed to, and he is also committed to making sure that those lower propensity Trump voters who do turn out for him when his name is on the ballot, that they understand that the Trump agenda is on the ballot in the midterm. So I do think that's going to be something that will be different in the 26 midterms from the 2018 midterms. And then as far as Trump's approval rating himself, I just don't really, unless it's trended downward somewhat, but it's also not been like a huge shift over the last, year. And so I'm just fairly skeptical unless something happens with the economy. If the economy shifts downward, I do think that would be the thing that Democrats in the midterms are going to be able to kind of tie directly to the tariffs and probably be able to tie that pretty directly. But otherwise, other than that, I don't really think necessarily that his approval rating dropping 1 or 2 points or going up 1 or 2 points is going to
But
matter a great
do you,
deal.
do you worry that the support that Trump gets on election day in 2016, 2020, 2024, it doesn't seem to translate to Republicans when he's not on the ballot. He had a bad off year election in 18, 19. He lost in 20. Matt, he lost. Then in this year. So there is not a single example of an off year election that Republicans have had a good night in the last 10 years, other than the 2 general elections that Trump won.
And
So do
21
you
in
worry
Virginia.
about that? Brad,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead. John,
yeah,
you go first. Yeah.
yeah. Historically, I mean, obviously, if you're the party in power in the White House, midterms tend to be pretty tough, right? I mean, that's just kind of the nature of American electoral politics for the last century or so. But I mean, the map also matters quite a bit. So if you're looking at the Senate map, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, Ohio is still going to be really tough to win. I think for Democrats to win that Senate seat, right? I mean, Georgia, probably, I think they have it's going to be a very competitive race in Georgia, but a lot of those seats, I mean, even Kim Paxton, I think will win if he's the nominee in Texas, even though it might be really narrow, right? So the map matters a lot too, especially on the Senate side.
But candidate quality matters there too. Like, I mean, look, if Ken Paxton's not the nominee, Texas is not in play. If Ken Paxton is the nominee, that's going to be a real race.
Yeah, agree.
I mean, you're talking
100%.
about tens of millions of dollars that shift from other places that now get focused on Texas. So, I mean, I love what you said earlier, John. It all goes together. You can have the best candidate in the world, and if they're running in the wrong environment with the wrong demographics, they can't win. But if you're in a tight race, it takes good political talent often to win when all other things are equal. Well, hey, I want to respect our time here. We've got a little less than 10 minutes. I have a specific question for you, Brad. It's actually a 2-part question. Then I have a specific question for John, and then we'll have some closing remarks to get out of here. Brad, 2 parts for you. First, how special was it for you last night to have such a good friend win such a big race in your home state with your children volunteering on the campaign and they're witnessing history last night? Yeah, I'm not excited about a Democrat winning, but I'm excited for you and your family and what you guys were able to accomplish. Give us some insight into that, but then also, just kind of focus, where do you see the path of the Democratic Party going as far as candidate recruitment, and what kind of candidates do you see as emerging if the Democrats are going to be successful at winning the midterms and then further into 2028, getting the presidency back?
Well, it's on the personal level, it's really cool and really will be probably a once in a lifetime experience to see her get elected and to be down there and see my kids running around with her kids because we've hosted them at our house numerous times over the years. It was special, and so it's also someone that not only do I like a lot personally, but I also believe is a great politician and is in it for the right reasons. And I think even if you met her, Matt, I think even you'd like Abigail, and you'd walk away from that being like,
No.
what, she's a pretty good Democrat. I can say that about Republicans, that they're ones that are in it for the right reasons. They want to do it the right way, and she's that way for a Democrat. She really wants to find the best solution that's going to be the best outcome for everybody that she's representing. And so,
Well, John
that's
said it
why
best. If all the candidates running for Congress across the country were like Abigail Spanberger, we'd be a lot more worried about the future of our party.
I mean, she is a unique political talent, and I think the future is bright for her. And so seeing her, really in 7 short years go from running in what was Eric Cantor's old seat in a race that I didn't think that she could win in 2018 to getting elected governor 7 years later is amazing. So that's great. I would say the second part of your question, my advice to candidates, whether you're running for the school board or whether you're running for governor or running for president, is the most important thing is to be authentic to who you are. And I think that the candidates who are the most successful, be they are Democrats or Republicans, are ones who run campaigns that are reflective of who they are as a person, and voters see that, and they believe in that. And I think that's what made Abigail's campaign so good, is that, she really cared about finding solutions. She had detailed policy plans focused on affordability issues for people in Virginia. She didn't do that because some campaign consultant told her in a focus group that this is what's important. She did it because it's what she believed in. It's what she wanted to do and what she wants to do as governor. And so I think that voters at the end of the day saw that, and that's why they reacted so well to her, is because they really believed that she believed in them and wanted to do what was best for them. And I think those are the best candidates for whatever office they're running for.
That's great. So, John, going over to you, I guess I'll make it a two-part question for you as well, because of something Brad said. You're a pollster. You're giving candidates these numbers, and I think there's this thought out there that all pollsters are very robotic and they tell candidates exactly what to say, how to say it. And I don't think that's the case. You give information that helps guide decisions. But how important do you view authenticity as a pollster? How important do you view authenticity? And then second part of your question is, if you were President Trump's top advisor this morning, what advice are you giving him based on what you saw last night across the country?
I'll take the second part of that question first, and it kind of goes to something that I said earlier, which is that President Trump, even though he's not going to be on the ballot in 2026, his presence and then the presence of his team is going to be central to Republicans being able to turn out the lower propensity voter who voted for him in 2020, maybe the first time, and then they voted for him again in 2024, but maybe they didn't vote in the midterms in 2022, and so his presence is going to be key. And I think he understands that, and I think the White House political operation understands that too. And then going back to kind of the counsel you give candidates, what Brad said is right. I mean, candidates have to stay true to what their convictions are, and they have to stay true to what they care about. But they also have to understand where voters are and what voters' concerns are too. And so sometimes you'll have some candidates that they'll have a hobby horse of an issue, and then it's just pretty clear after engaging with the electorate that that they care about more that issue than voters do. And then so sometimes you have to say, look, if you're going to win, this can be something you put in your platform, but it's not something that you need to make the top one or two issues. And you have to recognize that as busy as people are raising a family, trying to make a living, you only have so much of their time. And the time that you have is going to be very limited, and you're going to really have one, at most two messages that you can get across in the course of a campaign.
I have two quick questions for John. It's a two-part question. The first is, Brad and I interact a lot with Republican members of the House and Senate, either at events at our townhouse or on the golf course. And a lot of them privately are very critical about the tariffs. Do you think it is wise in the midterms, once Republicans get through their primary, to run away from the president on the tariffs or to double down on it? And the second part to the question is, you said President Trump will not be on the ballot in 2026. Will you commit to him not being on the ballot in 2028?
I think on the second part of that, I think President Trump said something very recently about that he knew that he was not going to be able to run in 2028. So he's kind of answered that question. But as far as what I would advise somebody after their primary is done, it goes back, I think, to what we were just talking about, which is, Congressman, what do you believe, right? And that's where you need to be, right? And the political ramifications of the tariffs really is almost like people are going to react to the tariffs only in the sense that if they feel like the economy is going negatively, right? If they feel like the economy is going fairly well, I don't think the tariffs are going to really matter that much in the midterms. But if the economy slows down quite a bit, then that's where, maybe it could be an effective weapon, I think, for Democrats to use. But I don't think I would advise somebody to be like, don't try to be cute about it. And if you support it, stand by it, support it. And if you don't, say so.
A quick question for Brad. I thought that was kind of cowardly in the Democratic leadership to really dodge Mondami, and I know that he's become a lightning rod on Fox News and other areas, but it's a little weird that Hakeem Jeffries didn't want to touch that. Chuck Schumer didn't want to touch it. A lot of other senior Democrats tried to keep their distance. Do you think they run the risk of pissing off a really excited part of the base? And is there a way to have it both ways? Can they acknowledge that a lot of people like his politics, but also carve out their own space? Or is it in for, in for the whole deal?
Well, I think that's all the time we got for tonight. So thanks for.
That's
had to
Rob.
ask you-
Rob always does at the last second. He drops a bomb. That's just how he does.
I had to ask them both a tough question. So yeah, let's hear it.
I mean, listen. Personally, as someone that's Jewish, I have a lot of concerns about Mondami being elected, and I think that my own misgivings reflect a lot of the misgivings of people like Chuck Schumer and Jeffries, and so I think it is a really delicate dance for them to do to balance. I actually thought that Abigail Spanberger's response, she got asked about Mondami, I think on Sunday, and she basically said, "Listen, I appreciate how he's inspired people and given them a lot of hope, but I also think that we have to be honest with people. Like, we can't give them free bus rides. Like, we can't give away all the free stuff that he's talking about. And I think that voters we have to be honest with voters about what we actually can do. And so, I agree with you. I think it was a bit of a cop out for the leaders, not, either endorse him or don't endorse him. But this sort of like, I'm not really sure, I'm going to endorse him at the last minute kind of is ridiculous. But I also think he ran against an incredibly terrible candidate in Andrew Cuomo, who's got more baggage than luggage claim at JFK, right? Like, the guy's horrible. I can't believe that in 11 million people who live in the city of New York, that Democrats couldn't come find another person to run against Mondami in the primary and win. Like,
I'm amazed he got 41% of the vote in the general election last night. I thought that was an independent. That's crazy.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, Rob, but
Look, it was a
um,
great answer, Brad, and I think you nailed it. Again, political talent. Abigail Spanberger answered it well. Chuck Schumer, whose approval rating's in the toilet, danced around it again today. It wouldn't even, obviously he didn't vote for the guy, and he couldn't come out and make a clarified statement about it is kind of ridiculous. So, guys, we're out of time. I want to thank you. This is, I think, insightful for our listeners. I also want to give a shout out to Signal. If you're a Republican looking for a pollster, they're the best in the business. Sponsor of the GMP Cup. We thank you for that, John. You and Brent have just been great supporters of our podcast. We appreciate it. Brad, as always, you give great insight. Appreciate you. And Rob, always a blast, brother. So,
and I want to encourage people to hire Brad at the majority group.
of course.
And,
And Rob, too.
I have no incentive in that.
Hire Rob, hire Brad.
Yeah.
Anyway, everybody, thank you for listening. Please go to golfandpolitics.com, sign up for our email newsletter. We won't spam you, but we'll give you some good information and good content. And anywhere you get social media or podcast content, we're there. Subscribe. We're trying to put out shows every single week. Gentlemen, have a great night. Hey.